Hello everyone, how's life treating you? Hopefully the answer to that question is really well. Let's kick off the show with a familiar subject, that subject being what's happening now. Sort of. There's trouble brewing in a country in Europe, folks, and no, it's not the one you're thinking of, or maybe it is. The country in question is the Republic of Macedonia, or just simply Macedonia. In case you have no idea where Macedonia is on a map, it's north of Greece. If you have no idea where Greece is on a map either, because admittedly it's a small country, just find Russia, place your finger on the capital of Moscow, and then drag it in a straight diagonal line towards the Mediterranean Sea. You'll likely pass over Macedonia or Greece. If you happen to have an issue finding Russia on a world map, I can't help you. You clearly have impaired vision. Anyways, so what's the big deal with Macedonia? Well, the simple answer to that question is an issue over equal rights and proper representation of an ethnic minority in the country. That minority being Albanians. Now, of course, I always go into the background information of the current situation when it comes to these stories, usually to provide a fuller picture. Normally it takes up a fair portion of the segment, but this backstory is actually not that complicated, but it does go back somewhat further than what we're used to. All the way back to 1912, actually, during the First Balkan War, which was in many ways the prelude to World War I. It all started when the Balkan League, which was comprised of 4 nations, those nations being Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. They rose up and defeated the armies of the Ottoman Empire, and essentially broke free from Ottoman control. The war was concluded during negotiations in 1913, and it was brought to an end by the Treaty of London, which really established the nations of Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, Montenegro, and Albania. Problem was, when Albania was established, a large portion of ethnic Albanians found themselves living outside the country's borders. However, as most probably know, these issues were kind of overshadowed in the immediate years and decades following 1913 by 2 major world wars and the Great Depression. Then, in 1946, the Allied powers essentially created Yugoslavia, which was basically them having no idea what to do about the Balkan region because they effectively ignored ethnic differences. But the Cold War that ensued basically overshadowed that issue of ethnic Albanian minorities located outside of Albania, particularly in Macedonia, which was a part of Yugoslavia, up until its end in 1991. This was when Yugoslavia was broken up and the Republic of Macedonia, along with others, seceded. Thing is, a fair portion of Macedonia's population, that being around 21% of it, in 1991 was ethnically Albanian. Despite having had assurances of minority protection since 1946 from Macedonia, even during its time as part of Yugoslavia, the ethnic Albanian community began to question whether they should really be a part of Macedonia. So in 1992, they set up a referendum to discuss the question of territorial autonomy. The Macedonian government didn't take too kindly to this and declared the referendum illegal. This and other grievances that started to make themselves apparent in the public light by the Albanian community all led up to building up tensions between them and the Macedonian government. And in February of 2001, the insurgency arose, which launched successful attacks on government forces in northern and western Macedonia. Fortunately, with international mediation, a ceasefire was made in July of 2001, and a coalition government negotiated and signed the Ohrid Framework Agreement in August of that year, which brought an end to the fighting and promised improved civil rights for ethnic minority groups in Macedonia. Also, the insurgency group known as the National Liberation Army, or NLA, agreed to disarm and hand over their weapons to NATO forces, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This seemed to have calmed the ethnic Albanian minority, and aside from a series of inter-ethnic violence in 2012 between ethnic Albanians and Macedonians that saw 7 deaths and 10 injuries, things were mostly looking alright. However, as of this week, about 2,000 ethnic Albanians have marched on the Macedonian capital in protest demanding the resignation of current Prime Minister Nikola Gruevski. I might be mispronouncing that name, so bear with me. He faces accusations of wiretapping and corruption. This scandal has also reignited the question of government representation of ethnic Albanians in Macedonia, as well as their demands for civil rights. Fortunately, this is a break from the usual for this segment, and it seems to be a peaceful demonstration. So what are my thoughts on this whole situation? In some ways, I can see where the Albanian minority in Macedonia is coming from. I mean, for some reason, the latest available census is from 2002 on population statistics, and the breakdown of that population in Macedonia. But even that one shows the percentage of minority Albanians at roughly 25%. That's nearly a quarter of the population. We can only imagine how much this has changed in the last 13 years. I mean, for all we know, Albanians might now make up a third of the population of the country now. I'd say, based on the information at hand, the minority Albanians are going about this correctly by not seeking to secede from Macedonia. We know how that turns out with other examples so far. And instead, they're seeking to improve their civil rights and representation in government. And I genuinely hope the government acknowledges their grievances and works with them. Phew. Okay, let's switch gears towards another country in another continent that needs to give it a rest. The country in question is Zimbabwe, and the subject in question is their currency. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zimbabwe's currency, the Zimbabwe dollar, allow me to put this in perspective. If you went to a market in Zimbabwe hoping to purchase a fair amount of basic grocery goods with a foreign currency like the British pound, or the American dollar, or the South African rand, you'd take your wallet or purse and would be alright. If you went to a market in Zimbabwe hoping to do the same thing but with the Zimbabwean dollar, you would have to take a wheelbarrow of the currency with you. You see, Zimbabwe has had an issue with hyperinflation for the past decade or so. In late 2008, the annual inflation rate was actually around 128 million%. To put that into perspective of how badly it has gotten since, let me just give you the accepted currency exchange rate for this Monday. That rate being 175 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars can be exchanged for a grand total of $5 US. I think it's safe to say the currency needs to be put to rest. And fortunately, it would seem the central bank of the country agrees, because it is phasing out the currency in September. Well done, Zimbabwe, for giving your currency a well-deserved rest. Now then, let's wrap this up and honor some heroes. This Thursday, on June 18th, it will be the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. To give you a really brief history to the background of this battle, in 1789, the French Revolution to remove the French monarch Louis XVI started, and upon the beheading of the royal family, by 1791, France had essentially made itself an enemy to the rest of the major monarchies of Europe. Over the span of nearly a quarter century, 5 unsuccessful coalitions and 2 successful coalitions arose against France, most of them all comprised by some combination of the nations of Prussia, Russia, Spain, Austria, Portugal, and of course, who could forget France's notorious enemy, back then at least, England. The first two coalitions were unsuccessful against revolutionary France. After a coup in 1799 by French General Napoleon Bonaparte occurred and effectively installed him as first consul of France, things settled down a bit before effectively flaring back up. Both sides were to blame for this. Napoleon had military aspirations for French expansion, and England seemed hell-bent on restoring a French monarchy and returning things to the way they were. Waterloo was the final battle that ended what is called the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. The continent of Europe would not see a war of the same magnitude and scope for nearly a century until World War I. In the end, the imperial monarchies of Europe got their way, and most would not see their reigns ended until the following century. But truly, one cannot help but respect and honor the incredible accomplishments of Napoleon Bonaparte and the French people in their efforts to end the rule of kings and queens in Europe. From the taking of the Bastille, to the siege of the city of Toulon, to the pyramids of Egypt, to the Italian Alps, to a self-coronation as emperor, to Trafalgar, to Austerlitz, to Moscow, to Berlin, to the Isle of Elba, to a triumphant return, and to the Battle of Waterloo. We honor the brave heroes who fought in these battles, whether they fought because they wanted to spread an idea, or because they feared subjugation or wanted national sovereignty. Truly, the efforts of these people are worthy of praise. That's all for today, everyone. See you next week.